One newfangled type of entertainment for which the Opera House was a perfect venue was the projection of moving pictures. After the turn of the century, this new and exciting public spectacle drew crowds to local halls, as much to experience the effects of the new technology as to learn and be entertained by the content of the film. One such presentation was Boer War Warograph, which was advertised tonight at the Opera House, Brighton, under the auspices of the Citizens Band. The playbill went on to exhort the locals in dramatic terms. The animated reproduction of the Boer War by the wonderful Warograph, with its startling mechanical sounding effects. Remember, you can hear the rush of cavalry, the roar of musketry, cracking of artillery, explosion of shells, etc., while you are viewing the different battle scenes. The most marvelous invention of the 19th century. Come and see the great Battle of Motor River, where the Canadians fought so gallantly. The famous charge of the 5th Lancers. Gallant capture of a Boer battery. Troop train crossing the Motor River. A hot skirmish with Boers near Kimberley, and many other interesting scenes. Another part of the film would show King Edward VII. The only moving pictures of His Majesty in Canada. And with kind permission, the Warograph Company has the extreme pleasure of introducing the noble king to loyal Canada. But the topper was a $1,000 picture, the funeral procession of Her late Majesty, our beloved Queen Victoria. The most marvelous moving picture in the history of the world. The only genuine and complete reproduction in the world of this, the greatest of all funeral processions. Secured at an enormous expense, displaying all the pomp and grandeur of England's royalty in paying their last tribute to the most beloved of all sovereigns. In case you didn't get it, don't fail to see the Warograph, the finest moving pictures ever exhibited in Canada, at least according to the Montreal Star. Wow, and that was right in the Opera House in Brighton. Down at Presqu'île Point, a much different development took place. By the 1860s, Presqu'île Point was covered with small farms, some people having purchased land and some just squatters. A survey in 1869 identified 19 different landowners, often with several small chunks of sand cobbled together to make a farm. It became evident over time that most of this land was not suited to farming, and many residents would move on to find better land and greater prospects. In the 1870s, the government stepped in and prohibited the cutting of any more trees on Presqu'île Point. Presqu'île Bay was considered a harbor of refuge for the ships sailing on Lake Ontario, and this was an attempt to limit further damage to the windbreak effect provided by the woods. This law had the further effect of reducing the viability of farming on Presqu'île Point. During the 1880s, several families from Brighton began to use the bay shore of Presqu'île Point near the east end by the lighthouse as a picnic spot or a good place to spend a few days camping. Sam Nesbitt and Isaac DeMille were only two of a growing group of merchants in Brighton who had gained a level of prosperity that allowed them to take their families on holidays in the summer, and Presqu'île became a favorite destination. In the early years, camping grew in popularity as more families joined the spring fleet of boats sailing across the bay, taking camping gear and whatever was considered necessary for the increasingly longer and longer visits. The building of permanent structures was prohibited, so tents had to be set up in the spring and taken down in the fall. In spite of this, larger and more elaborate tents evolved, with families vying with each other for the more ingenious and comfortable summer abodes. People very much wanted to build permanent cottages, but land ownership was still in the hands of the government, and nobody could predict what they were going to do. As the number of campers increased, the demand for a place to dance on those warm summer evenings motivated Sam Nesbitt to build a dance floor near his campsite. The floor was sheltered by a tent, and he charged admission to cover his costs. This was the first dance floor at Presqu'île. The Murray Canal had been completed in 1889. making it a lot easier for people around the Bay of Quinte and as far away as Kingston to consider Presqu'île Point as a Sunday picnic destination. The desire to holiday at Presqu'île quickly extended to the prosperous multitudes in Toronto and even to wealthier folks from New York looking for a place to tie up their yacht for a few weeks in the summer. The situation changed in the early 1900s when the government began to sell and lease land on Presqu'île Point. In 1905, Peter Koval, a businessman from Gosport, built a hotel on the bay shore, just a little west of the old wharf beside Salt Point. This two-story frame building had verandas on both levels, looking out over the lovely scene on Presqu'île Bay. A name contest resulted in the obvious Hotel Presqu'île. Opening day was July 1st, 1905, and the newspaper accounts suggest that all of Brighton was excited about this new establishment. But none was more interested than the three children standing on the west end at the lower veranda, looking square into the camera. These were the Atkins, Clarence, Gladys, and Jack, who lived on a farm not far west of the hotel. Many folks around Brighton will remember Harold Atkins, who was the son of Jack. Several pictures of Peter Koval's Hotel Presqu'île show a building to the east, which was a dance hall. It had been clearly demonstrated that summer visitors to Presqu'île wanted a convenient place to dance, and for a few years, this small structure beside the hotel would serve the purpose. Mr. Koval felt the need to increase the number of rooms in his hotel, so in 1912 he built an addition to the west end of the building. But then, in 1913, another businessman from Gosport, Grant Quick, acquired property on the south side of the road, just a little east of the hotel. There, he quickly built a much larger and more elaborate dance hall, with the idea of competing directly with Mr. Koval's dance floor beside the hotel. His marketing acumen was evident in the name he chose for his new dance hall, the Pleasure Palace. The Brighton Ensign newspaper reported on the masquerade ball at the Pleasure Palace on August 11, 1913. An evening of great pleasure was that of Wednesday last at Quick's Pleasure Palace, Presqu'île. Dancers were there in big numbers, and the Brighton Orchestra was there with that superior brand of music. Words failed the majority to express the praise they wished for the charming music. Piano, 3 violins, cornet, and drum poured forth, enlivening yet soothing strains until a late hour. This, coupled with the excellent condition of the floor, made the lads and lassies whirl in ecstasy, greatly regretting when the hour was reached that the musicians had to depart. Everything seemed to be better for the music, the ice creams more delicious, the variety of drinks more refreshing, and all was aglow through the medium of the orchestra. Wow! Makes you wish you'd been there. That summer, competition was sharp between Quick's Pleasure Palace and Koval's hotel and dance floor. However, the conflict lasted only that one season. On August 1st, 1914, just a few days before the Great War broke out, Grant Quick purchased the hotel from Peter Koval. The Presqu'île Hotel Company was now the owner of both buildings, with Grant Quick as the proprietor, and a cottager from Toronto, William John McCallum, coming in as an investor. A brother-in-law of Mr. McCallum, Frank Bogue, was the contractor who had built the Pleasure Palace. It was the beginning of an era. The Pleasure Palace itself nowhere near lived up to its name in terms of appearance. It was a rather squat, single-story wood structure, which seemed to be mostly roof. Large parts of the north and west walls were windows, which, when the wooden covers were lifted, let the cool evening breeze flow over the dance floor. The surface of the dance floor was known far and wide as one of the best anywhere. It was constructed of the best quality tongue-and-groove maple and was persistently cared for by staff to keep it smooth and clean. The practice of spreading crushed candles on the floor before dancing started demonstrated a cost-effective method of maintenance. The dancers did the work. The Pleasure Palace would serve spectacularly in the role of dance hall for many decades, and for several generations of dancers and music lovers around Brighton. The Pleasure Palace at Presqu'île quickly became a very popular destination for people in the area, but many patrons came from much farther afield. prosperous families from Toronto took the train to Brighton and then a boat across the bay to occupy rooms in the hotel or to stay at a rented cottage. Wealthy businessmen from Ohio and New York State sailed their yachts to Presqu'île Bay and tied them up at the dock, often staying most of the summer. Grant Quick aggressively pursued top entertainment acts and was able to book them because of the persistent large summer crowds and one of the best dance floors in the country. One of the most famous acts to appear at the Pleasure Palace was dancers Vernon and Irene Castle. This couple had popularized ragtime and were in demand around the world. In the summer of 1917, Vernon Castle was a Royal Canadian Flying Corps instructor at Desirado when the pair was booked at Pleasure Palace. They flew to Presqu'île and landed in the field west of the dance hall. It was a spectacular night of dance and music and was talked about for years after. However, tragedy imposed itself on these happy times. Early the next year, Vernon Castle was killed in a plane crash in Texas. During the Great War, women of Brighton who had been touched by tragedy gathered field stones from their farms and laid them together to the west of the town hall in Brighton. By the end of the war, there was a considerable collection of field stones commemorating the loss of local community members in the war. In 1919, Legion Branch 100 raised over $1,000 to build a cenotaph, and the land was donated to the town. A simple fieldstone monument was built. A few years later, the pyramid shape of the monument was created by the railway troops, and in 1927, Arthur Currie dedicated the cenotaph. The cenotaph and the town hall would be the central symbols of Brighton for many generations. Well before the Roaring Twenties began, Brighton's two entertainment venues were well established and thriving. The Opera House in the Town Hall in Brighton was booked constantly for theatrical performance, dances, celebrations, and major events. The Pleasure Palace operated only in the summer, but was immensely popular, featuring world-class performers in the ideal location at Presqu'île Point. However, the next 4 decades would prove to be the heyday for dance halls, and especially for these two establishments. Stay tuned.